Hello, my name is Daniel Carr. I am choosing the multimodal option for the socio-psycholinguistics essay. So I'm just going to talk about what I've learned from this unit. It comes from this book here, Teaching and Reading in a Multicultural Classroom by Freeman and Freeman. And so I'll start with the first thing I've learned is that acquisition is better than learning. Learning comes like from a traditional classroom. You listen, you take some notes, maybe you know basically memorize certain things, and then you are able to regurgitate the information on some kind of quiz or some sort of test. Acquisition involves being immersed in whatever the subject is, so it's more than just learning it to memorize it to pass a test. You're actually engaged in it. You're Everything that you're doing is for the acquisition of it. So if you take an example they use in the book is with language. You learn a language and you memorize certain things, certain words, maybe even got an A on it. A couple years down the road, it's going to be tough to remember a lot of things. Now, if you had an acquisition of a language, so maybe you go and visit, let's say Spain, if you want to learn Spanish, you go and visit Spain, stay there for 2 years, you're going to have a lot better of a chance of remembering when you leave Spain 2 years down the road. You'll still probably have, pretty decent fluency in the language. So that is acquisition there. Acquisition comes from engaged classrooms. It's hard to have acquisition if the kids are just sitting there and waiting for the class to be over so they can go see their friends or whatever. But if they're actually involved, engaged, doing things hands on, talking with each other, things like that, having a classroom that involves engagement creates an opportunity for acquisition. So another thing mentioned in there is the kids are tired of the same old boring text, and I think that that's pretty accurate as well. It's hard to have a classroom that is trying to be engaged and active and things like that, and have the same old boring text. They're not really going to be into it. They don't really like it too much. To be honest, most of the times the teachers probably get a little tired of it. And that leads me to my next point. The teacher is a demonstrator. They say believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. And if the kids come in, you can say, hey, reading is good, all that, but they never see you reading. You never have any books, on your desk. You never talk about reading any books. They probably don't want to read much either. They think, well, it's probably not that important. The teacher doesn't do it. They say it, maybe because they have to, but they don't practice it. They don't at least practice it in front of us as being students. So maybe it's not that important. It's the teacher's job to show them. Like, I'll demonstrate for you. Maybe, as the book mentions, you come into class and for the first few minutes, everyone's reading, including myself. Instead of just looking and making sure you guys are reading, if I'm the teacher, I'll read as well during this time to show you just how important it is. I also want to talk about there are a group of questions here, and they are in this book here. And what they talk about are, the first one is, what do you remember? These are Hanson's questions here. And it's, what do you remember? So when you're reading, what do you remember? This lets the class start to talk, and they don't even have to just answer to you. They can answer to their classmates. This, creates a trustworthy environment where their ideas aren't just going to be, shot down, which, you know, allows them to produce more ideas. And also it just, an opportunity to make sure that they're getting something out of the text, at least that they're comprehending something, they remember something. The next one is, what else would you like to know? So this is a little deeper of engagement. It's, what else would you like to know? There are certain texts where you don't really get the end of the story, but if you were engaged, you want to know that. You want to know, let's say you're reading a comic book, you want to know what happens to the villain. You want to know, Maybe do they live happily ever after? If you're reading a fairy tale, you want to know what happens. Uh, the next one is, what does it remind you of? So now this calls for reflection. You want to be able to relate this back to your life. This, in turn, again, will create more engagement from the students. What does it remind you of in your life? Maybe a story, maybe, an incident when you were a childhood, memory, something like that. Anything that, can relate back to your life to allow you to feel more connected to the text. And then it's, what other things have you read that it reminds you of? So not only is it now you being connected to the text, you're connecting the text with other texts, which again now starts to create something that makes sense. Instead of you just doing this book, and this book, you start to get books that start to relate to each other. Oh, I remember from this book this happened, so now I understand a little more. Now I have a little bit more to talk about. Now I feel more comfortable talking because I understand it more. I've become more engaged in it. I've become more connected to the text. And so that's my spiel there from this book here. This is what I have gathered. And, thank you for listening.